you. My presentation is on in situ and ex situ conservation of Humboldtia longifolium and development of its horticultural potential. You heard a lot about the biology and ecology of Humboldtia longifolium in the presentation given by Professor Punit Tilakar. It's actually in Sri Lanka we call it Gal Karanda or Ruwan Karanda. It's a small endemic tree. When it comes to the nomenclature of or the naming of the plant, it was first named as Bachia lorifolia by Norwegian botanist Martin Voll. He named this plant as Bachia in his own genus. The genus Bachia was described by Voll in 1794 in the publication Systemae Botanicae, and he actually named it after a German botanist, Bach. He was also actually a mycologist, but he also did some work on angiosperms as well. So Voll named the genus Bachia after Bach and included lorifolia, our plant Galkaranda, in that genus Bachia as Bachia lorifolia. Lorifolia meaning loras-like leaves, like bay leaves, like the leaves are similar to loras in shape. So Bachia lorifolia was the name given to Galkaranda in 1794 by Voll. But then he found, while that book is in print, because at that time it's not like these days, the printing is done by using these lithographic methods, and it takes time to print a book. While the book is in press, he found that the name Bachia was given to a plant in the family Menispermaceae by Melling. So that was about 3 years before, in 1791. So he immediately wanted to correct it, but the book was in print and that part was printed. So he added an errata to the end of the book with the new name, the new genus, which he named after Alexander von Humboldt. So Bachia became Humboldtia. The genus Bachia is already there. So it was described by Melling in 1791. So our plant, Bachia lorifolia, became Humboldtia lorifolia. But then a little later, I think in 1830s or so, Herbert White recorded that Humboldtia lorifolia is also found in Kerala. There was a specimen actually collected by Herbert White in Malabar area in Kerala. And later it was found that it's not actually lorifolia. It's misidentified. Actually, it's a plant belonging to the species Humboldtia Volliana. Volliana named after Voll. So now we know, there are several papers to say that what's recorded as Humboldtia lorifolia in Malabar in Kerala is not actually Humboldtia lorifolia, it's Humboldtia loriana. So our plant became an endemic plant to us. So Humboldtia lorifolia in our records, in most of our records, it says, even in Trimont, so even revised handbook to the flora of Ceylon, published during the last 2 decades, Humboldtia lorifolia is given as an indigenous plant, which is also found in India. So that's not the case. There are some recent publications also by Balan et al. In 2016 and also last year, November 2019, saying that it's not found in Sri Lanka. Lorifolia is not found in Sri Lanka. Sorry, not found in India. It's found in Sri Lanka and it's an endemic plant to us. So that being clear, I mean, in fact, even in the seminal paper by Crombine et al. Also mentioned that it's an endemic plant, but it's not. It was not very clear. But in these balance papers, it is very clear. They have done a very serious survey to find whether it occurs in India, and they found that it doesn't occur in India. As for the Gunatilaka mentioned, it's an understory tree found in the lowland wet zone of Sri Lanka. But we have found that Lorifolia or Galkaranda, Hamburgia lorifolia, and some other plants, some other places in dry and intermediate zone as well. If you look at the distribution of the species in Sri Lanka, Professor Gunatilaka has shown it in different climatic zones. Here you can see, if you look at the right-hand side of the map, there are 3 dots, which is actually not in the wet zone. Those are actually one we found in Danigala, Ratugala area in Monragal district, and Dr. Suranjan Prandu has found it in Pokagala mountain also, and few other isolated mountains in Monragal area. So it's found in habitat where sufficient moisture is available for its growth, and it's not restricted to wet zone. So in some parts of Kurnagal also you find this plant in wetter microclimates. So, but basically it's a wet zone plant found in the wet zone of Sri Lanka, lowland wet zone of Sri Lanka, so in the southwest. But if you look at the National Red Data book, which was published in 2012, in fact, the current version is coming out this year, hopefully before the end of the year. It's listed as under the category least concern. So that means it's not a threatened plant. But if you look at the global red list published by the IUCN, it's listed as a vulnerable plant. In any case, even though it's found in protected areas, it's always better to keep an eye to see whether the populations are healthy. Because there are various factors affecting the health of natural populations of trees. Now these are very well, these are trees which have so many links with animals and with insects, spiders and all the other invertebrates. I think Professor Gunatilaka mentioned in this letter, I don't know whether it was, whether you noticed that this has a very unique quality, very, very unique characteristic. That is, now usually we find nectaries in flowers to attract pollinators. But in this particular plant, you find nectaries on leaves. So insects, those ants and other invertebrates get attracted to those, nectar producing these leaf nectaries. So these are actually kind of bribes given to those ants who can come and occupy, and even some can even live in those little domiciles in the internodal areas, and then protect the plant. There are other animals who will be damaging the plant. So these are actually hired mercenaries. So to provide them with food, they have these nectaries even on leaves. So it's very interesting species. And then, although it's in protected areas, I think we have to keep an eye and see whether the plant is protected. So in situ conservation, or protecting the plant in its natural habitat. So natural ecosystem is the best option. We can afford to do that. The other option, where the botanical gardens are coming in, is the ex situ conservation. That is conservation outside the natural habitats. The plant we have seen in the morning was brought to the botanical gardens more than 150 years ago and planted, and there's another plant also. So those are protected ex situ, outside the natural habitats. In fact, in this garden, in Peradeniya Botanical Gardens, there are about 6 plants, 6 species, which are found, which are cultivated in the gardens, and the original habitats of those species are no more. So the individuals present in these gardens are the only representative individuals of those species on Earth. There's one species which has only 6 individuals, and those 6 individuals are found only in the botanical gardens. So that is ex-situ conservation. So we can multiply and propagate, and you can reintroduce those into suitable habitats. So luckily, nothing happened to, nothing of that nature has happened to Humboldtia lorifolia yet. But to be on the safe side, it's always better to have an ex-situ collection in places like botanical gardens, which we are doing, which the botanical gardens are doing now. So ex-situ conservation is an option. So as I mentioned, Royal Botanic Gardens has a collection, ex-situ collection of Humboldtia lorifolia. This is a scene from the Arboretum, which has about 10,000 different species from all over the tropics, from New World tropics and Old World tropics. And there is a new botanical garden established in 2008, closer to Colombo, about 1 hour drive from Colombo. It's in a place called Ilukkovita in the Avissa Valley area, 105-acre botanical garden in the floristic region, bit similar to Singharaja and Rakwana. And there, of course, the botanical gardens are planning to have an ex-situ collection of Humboldtia lorifolia. Now, it's 105-acre garden, and the idea is to have ex-situ, not ex-situ individuals, ex-situ population. Conservation, ex-situ conservation at population level. So rather than having just 1 or 2 individuals, which is the case here in the botanical gardens here, Peradeniya. Now in Peradeniya Botanical Gardens, maximum you have 1 or 2 individuals of particular, you take a species. Now, that species I was talking about, which has about 6 individuals, Alphonsia hortensis and Annonaceae, we have 6 trees. That's the maximum, and that's it. Those are the 6 trees on Earth. Choria olifolia or Duna olifolia, 1 individual. That's it. So now the trend is to have not just 1 or 2 individuals as an ex-situ collection, have populations. So we can have larger collection of species to conserve a larger or greater proportion of diversity, genetic diversity. So at the Avissa Valley Botanical Garden, the plan is to have a large population of Humboldtia lorifolia as an ex-situ collection. This is also a medicinal plant. Bark, leaves, roots, and even seeds are used for various diseases and ailments, for piles, ulcers, cellulitis, syphilis, alopecia, abscesses, boils, tumors, eye diseases, and even skin diseases. So there are various preparations made out of these different parts of the tree, bark, seed, and leaves, and so forth. So it's a valuable medicinal plant as well. And it's a beautiful plant, as Mr. Henry Rajapaksa mentioned. It's a beautiful plant with fragrant flowers. I have noticed 2 colors, white colored and also pinkish color flowers. So they're beautiful, and it's a small size, small tree. It doesn't take up much space, and not only flowers, even the flush, the young leaves are beautiful. Some of you may know there is a plant called Amherstia nobilis. It has very beautiful drooping young foliage, and even Brownia and Saraka. All these leguminous trees have young, beautiful, drooping foliage. Now, if you look at here on the right-hand side, it's the young foliage. You can see that whitish. Sometimes it can even get into a rose pinkish color. Drooping young foliage, having very beautiful effect, and the flowers are also beautiful. This is the white form, and this is the pinkish form, and also the young flush also are very beautiful. So it's a wonderful plant to have in your home garden. And it can be easily propagated. Now, it was suggested to have more of these plants and distribute them among those people who are interested, who want to have them, have those plants in their home garden. This can be propagated by seeds and also by stem cuttings. So legume and two-nodal cuttings, sufficiently mature cutting, can be used for vegetative propagation. I understand that the Department of Botanic Gardens, where I used to work for some time, is planning to propagate Humboldtia lorifolia in large numbers at the Avissa Valley Ilukkovita West Zone Botanic Garden. Those can be distributed among interested people. So I think, as Mr. Rajapaksa suggested, they are already taking measures to propagate this. It's a beautiful plant, and thank you very much. Any questions? I don't know whether it's there in the, yeah, Professor Benjamin.
When to propagate them to different places, how do the insects colonize the plant? Is there any idea of that? Or?
That's a very interesting question. Now, yeah, well, Professor Benjamin is asking whether now it has several insect plant interactions. When you plant it in a outside, a new place, whether we have the same interaction, like same animals will be there to,
How would they colonize?
Yeah, the colonization, how would they colonize? Now, even if you look at the plants here at Peradeniya Gardens, they were taken from the wet zone, maybe about 100 or so miles away from the original habitat. Now we find the insects here. So probably they will come from the neighborhood and occupy. Maybe they may not be the same species, but same. Now this happens when we have invasive plants or exotic plants coming into a country. The plant, after coming into a new habitat, they will hire the local, insects or animals to do the job for pollination and various things. So nature will find a way.
I think that's an interesting question. And even within the island, it's found in different climatic zones. And it's worth looking at the genetic diversity of the insect species within them and see related they are. And to go a step further, we can actually compare with those in India as well, sort of by geographic studies.
Yeah. There may be some co-evolution because there's similar thing happening in pigs now. Sure, you may have that. Dobzhansky has done a lot of work on plant-animal interaction and co-evolution. So probably things like that may be happening in the case of Humboldt as well. Yeah.
Evolved from communities in eucalyptus in Australia. I've been shown that a lot of co-evolution and the height associations and plant and the youth association in other occasions. So these are interesting.
And then there was this question asked by Dr. Achalathanayake about the pollination by insects, so ants. I have seen, but I think that is the main pollinator. The bees are the pollinators of these plants, not necessarily ants.
So are these insects doing any harm to leaves?
They don't harm the plants per se, but probably they may be guarding the plants from harmful insects, other. They don't harm the plant. They don't eat the leaves, so they don't, do any damages to the parts of the plant.
If I may add to that, now, according to that masterpiece by Crombine and others, they have studied, and Fredrickson and others, they have studied in detail, and they have found that these particular ants, it is the species that is found in large numbers here, they protect the plant, the young parts of the plant from other predatory insects. There are other predatory insects. So if you reduce the number, as you have seen in my presentation, there are two populations, one inside the forest and one outside. So inside the forest, only 50% of the stems are swollen. So there is a herbivory damage because there are predatory insects coming and feeding on the on these young parts. But the function of this co-evolved species is to protect it from these predatory ants. So there's one group which is protecting and the other group which is trying to predate. So it's a mutualistic association to protect the young parts of the plant, for which the nectar is provided, as Professor Vijayasundara said, giving a bribe to protect the plant. It's an extrafloral. It's a different function, as it quite rightly said. Not the floral nectaries, these are extrafloral, mostly to keep these mercenaries, as he said, in their cages.
No, one other thing is that now usually, I want to reiterate that nectaries are found in flowers. Here, the insects who want to feed on these or to come and help the plant to protect from other insects, they don't have to wait until the flowers come. Right? Leaves are there always, so there is always nectaries. There is always nectar. So that is another advantage. That's probably the reason why the nectaries are placed on leaves. If it is on the flowers, those insects will have to wait until the flowers bloom and the plant blooms. So these are very interesting advantages. In fact, this we find in other different genera of legumes as well. In some acacia species also we have insects living inside the hollow areas of thorns and all that. So there are so many associations, but this is very interesting. This is probably the masterpiece. I mean, when it comes to a plant-animal interaction. Humboldt himself, yeah. And attract, and I think that's the last slide of Tilaka. Humboldt attracted many people and many. I mean, was the most popular Facebook person of those days. So many fan base is so big, as His Excellency the Ambassador himself mentioned. So Humboldt attracts many different insects and even spiders. Yes.
Regarding pollination, are they helping this insect or by me?
No, I think pollination is by bees.
By
Bees and wasps. They are the hired army for protection. The army, the insects who are feeding on the nectar. Any other questions? We have 2 minutes.